Hi everybody, this is Tiffany and today's video will show you how to set up your folders in Stata. So the first thing you want to do is you want to create your folder for your course. So for example, this is for Education 288A, Educational, Social, and Behavioral Statistics. So ideally you would have this folder, for example, in a separate UCI folder that contains all your courses. This is just on my desktop just to show you as an example, but ideally this would be organized. So once you have that folder created, you want to make sure you're organizing each of your weekly folders. So for example, you would have a week 1 folder with the topic that you're learning that week. So for example, maybe in week 1, you're learning about linear regression. So we're going to title this week 1, linear regression. And then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to have week 1 to week 10 folders and maybe a finals week folder and maybe a folder, for example, for any final exams, midterms, or papers that you might have for each of your courses. So once you're set up there, let's go in to see what each week's folder looks like. So the way that I like to set it up is I like to have 3 separate folders. This is optional. This is just one way that you can organize your things. So for example, I would have a folder for anything that you do in class. So these can include, for example, the lecture notes or the PowerPoint slides that you might have for that week. And then I'll have 2 other folders. One is what we'll be doing in lab, so that will include your Stata folders, which I'll show you in a bit. And then the other thing you'll be doing is for your problem sets. And you'll also set up the folders the same way you'll do for lab, which is some project organization folders specifically for Stata and any other tools that you might use. For example, in R and SPSS, the logic and the folder project management is really similar across these different tools. Okay, so let's, for example, take a look at the lab. So every time we work in Stata, we want to make sure that we are setting up Stata correctly, and we want to make sure that all of our folders are organized correctly. It helps us with reproducibility. It helps us stay organized, especially because when you start working on more complicated files or you work with lots of data, it can get messy really, really fast. So you want to stay as organized as humanly possible. So let's walk through each of these folders. So the first folder you're going to have is going to be a data folder. This means this folder will contain any data sets that you need for one specific project or the lab, or maybe it's for the problem set. So you're going to have a folder named data. Within the data folder, I typically have 2 separate other subfolders. One is called clean and one is called raw. So you don't have to do this starting out because if you're just learning Stata, this might not be something that you want to do until you have a little bit more familiarity with Stata. If you want to go ahead and try it and you've used Stata a few times now, then please, I highly encourage you to do this. So the raw folder keeps your raw data files. These are data files that you do not want to overwrite. You don't want to manipulate, change, modify this in any way. You want to keep it as is. So for example, maybe you're part of a randomized control trial project and you just got all your data points from Excel. Now you're going to put that Excel, that's your data file, into this raw folder right here, and you're not going to touch it at all. And then when you actually need to clean the data, you need to make this data, you need to modify it into some form that you can use to actually analyze and produce results, then you're going to create another data set and save that as a cleaned file. But you never want to save over your raw data files. You always want to make sure that you keep a copy in here that's untouched. Okay, so that's your data folder. Then your second folder is going to be do files. You can call this do files, or if you wanted to, you can also call this your program file. They mean the same thing. Do files are just very specific to Stata, and we'll learn what a do file is. So let me first just show you what a do file can look like. So I've opened up Stata right here, and this is a do file, and this is exactly what a do file looks like. This is what you'll be working with the entire time that you use Stata, basically from here until forever. And this is where you write commands. For example, we look at what the print directory is. Maybe we'll look at a code bug. Maybe we'll look at the data set itself. So all your commands are written and stored right here on this do file. So that is what a do file is for. We'll learn about it a little bit more on the first day of class and you'll have a lot of familiarity with what a do file is. But for now, just know that it's something that you'll always have to save and record. So my preference is actually just to call it do file, so I'm going to rename that do files. And then within your do files, you can have subgroup folders, subfolders that help you organize it a little bit better. So again, for now, you don't have to do this until you get a little bit more familiarity, you start doing a little bit more complicated things in Stata, then you can start organizing it. If you wanted to start doing that now, you can. The way I typically organize it is I have a folder for cleaning. So this is me cleaning the data. Then I have one for analyses, or I might call that main analyses. So that's the analyses that I run to answer my main research questions. Then I might have a separate folder to collect do files for all the descriptives that I run, any checks, robustness checks, things like that might go in an appendices, and maybe a subgroup analyses folder. This will depend. This can vary person by person. This is just my personal preference, but in general, it might look something like this, depending on your project. Okay, so after our do files folder, we have something called a log. A log is a way of recording what you're doing in do file. So while you have your do file saved and you have things that you can manipulate in do file, the log just records what you are doing in the do file. We'll learn this more on the first day of class and also in a separate video about what the logs are doing. But for now, all you need to know is that you need to have a folder, and it's a very simple command that we'll learn to type out, and it'll just save the logs, and we're just going to save it in this log folder. And typically I don't have subfolders for logs. You could if you wanted to, but I typically don't. Okay, so our next folder is going to be an output folder. There's several names for this. You can call it output. If you wanted to, you can rename this to results. That means the same thing, but basically what you are producing with Stata, that goes into this folder here. So within this folder, you can also have several subgroup folders. Sometimes I have 3 main ones, sometimes I might have 4, might have 5, depends on the paper and the project. In general though, what you'll be using is the main results. So these are maybe the coefficient tables or any graphs that you might produce that answers your main research questions. And then you'll always have some sort of descriptive table. So I have a separate folder that produces my outputs on my tables into this descriptives file, and maybe anything that I put in the appendix. So just 3 main folders, but again, this will vary person to person, project to project. So the last folder I have on here is a temp folder. So this temp stands for temporary. I don't have any subfolders in this, but what this temp folder does is that it holds anything that you do not need to keep permanently. So it could, for example, be like a do file. Maybe you just want to check something very quickly, but you don't really need that as part of your main analysis. You're not making a table. There's something that you don't need to keep, but that you just wanted to do quickly, and you can later just remove very quickly. That will go in the temp folder. So it's anything that's not here permanently. So you're going to want to set up all 5 of these folders just like this for your labs and for your problem sets. So I'm clicking into the problem set folder, and look, it's the exact same setup for problem sets. And I'm going to make sure to do that for all the weeks. So in week 1, I have my in-class lab and problem set. And within the lab, we see these 5 folders. Within the problem set, we see the same 5 folders. Anything using Stata, you always want to set it up this way, and you always want to stay as organized as possible. So for week 2, I have the same file structure. I have in-class lab problem set, and then for lab, I have the same 5 folders. If I'm working with Stata, I'm always going to have the same 5 folders, and then same with the problem sets. Because the problem sets are using Stata, I'm going to have the same 5 folders. So that's how you set up your folders in Stata. So if you have Stata on your own computer, you can stop the video here. If you are using Apporto, I'll show you how to do this in Apporto. It's basically the same thing. The only caveat is the way that you download the file folder is a little bit different than just pressing the download button. Okay, so now we're in Apporto. I'm going to show you how to set up the folders. So I'm just going to right click. I'm going to hit new, and I'm going to create a new folder. So I'm just going to call this one week 1 lab. So pretending we're going to use Stata for weeks 1 lab, you can do the same thing. For example, if you're working on a problem set, so you can create a separate folder called week 1 problem set, and so on and so forth. So let me remove this for now. So let's work in this week 1 lab folder. What we're going to do is we're going to create those same 5 folders that we created earlier. So we're going to right click new and then folder, and then we're going to create all our different folders. So the first one is data. The second are the do files folder, or you can also call that the program folder. Then we have our logs, and then our fourth folder is going to be the results, or you don't have to call it results, you can also call that output. And then our last folder is our temp folder, which stands for temporary. And there we go, we have 5 folders. You can also just go in and create your subfolders now if you want to as well. So for example, in this data folder, we'll have a raw one. Let's ignore this. And then we'll have a cleaned data folder. And that's where we'll put our raw data, and that's where we'll put our clean data. Okay, so once you have the folder set up, now all you have to do is make sure that you save it. So once you're done using everything, you need to save it onto your own computer. So for folders, you cannot just press download and save it, because you see this download button doesn't appear, doesn't let you actually use it when I click on this folder. The reason is because Apporto doesn't let you save an entire folder. What you have to do is save each and individual file separately onto your computer. But that really just defeats the point of creating a folder. What you're going to do instead is that you're going to use a cloud manager, this cloud mounter app, and you're going to connect it to either your own personal Google Drive account, your Dropbox account, or your OneDrive account, and then you can upload your folder onto the Google Drive. So for example, I prefer Google Drive, so I'm just gonna connect this to my UCI account. So I'm putting in my credentials for my UCI account, and then it'll take you to the UCI Net login page. So I'm just going to log in, and then it'll have me do the dual identification. Okay, so I just approved it. I'm gonna say no, other people are using this device, so let me not save it. And then this always pops up. Google isn't really sure about Apporto, so what you're just going to want to do is hit advanced and just say, yes, this is fine, I approve of it. So you're going to hit go to Apporto Cloud Mounter right here. And then I'm just going to say yes to everything else afterwards, continue. And now what it's going to do is it's going to connect Apporto to my Google Drive folder. And that way all I have to do left is upload my folder onto my own Google Drive account. So right here, it's just showing me that it's loading, and now it's loaded. So now that it's loaded, I have this week 1 lab folder. All I'm going to do is just drag it over and just copy it in. This part always lags when I do it. It's just a function of Apporto though. Because I already had the week 1 lab in my folder, let me just upload it again. And then it should appear in your folder here. So let me look for week 1 lab. And I see it right here. So I'm just going to double check that it makes sense. So I'm going to open week 1 lab. And lo and behold, I have my data folder with the raw and clean file. I have my do files folder, and ideally I would have my actual do file in there. Logs, output, temp. So everything looks great. So now that this all looks good, I actually don't need to keep it on here for any reason. I can remove it, and then everything should be saved onto your Google Drive or your OneBox or your Dropbox, and it should be saved onto your own computer. Make sure you never ever keep anything on Apporto. You always want to keep a version for yourself. And that's how you set up your folders in Stata. Thanks, everybody.